Jeff Cooper explains his techniques for making your pistol ready.
At this point, someone is bound to ask, what must I do with my sidearm to make it shootable? Well, the answer to that ought to be nothing. The manufacturers ought to furnish sidearms ready to go out of the box. The fact is, however, that they usually do not. Now, the great majority of our students here use this old antique that I'm wearing, and which was designed in the early 1900s and was adopted in 1911. The way it comes out of the box, it needs something, but it doesn't need a great deal. And we fall into the error of doing things just for the sake of doing them, rather than doing them because we need to. The first thing to remember is that your pistol must be workable for you, and it doesn't have to be workable for anybody else. If you like something, do it. But if you don't like it, don't do it just because somebody wants to sell it to you or because somebody just won a match using this particular brand of checkering. The issue is that we are far too prone to mess around with equipment just for the sake of messing around. So use your head, huh? Do things you have to do and not things you don't have to do. Now, looking at the auto pistol first, the things that you should have on an auto pistol first are a trigger you can manage, sights that you can see, and a dehorning job. Those three. Now, what is a trigger you can manage? A trigger you can manage is one that breaks clean without any apparent motion. The word was, in the old days, the glass rod. Now, there's slack in that trigger. There has to be. But after the slack is taken up, there should be no apparent motion when the trigger lets go. You could press, press, press. Nothing moves. Nothing moves. But when you finally put the pressure on, there she goes. And you couldn't feel anything move before she went. Now, obviously, she has to move. Otherwise, the trigger would not break. But the movement must be as close to imperceptible as you can get it. And that's what's called a glass rod pull. Now, the weight is considerably less important. The weight could be anything from 3 pounds to 5 pounds, and you can live with that. 4 is about right. For many years in this country, there was a flat rule in competition involving this pistol that the trigger had to weigh 4.5 pounds. Well, that was a great improvement over what came out of the box, because back in World War I, the triggers were around 9, which meant that the only way you could fire them was to grit your teeth and stamp your foot and make them go off. However, that's an improvement over our brand new gun, the Beretta, which we have now, in which the triggers on that run between 9 and 11 single action and about 24 double action. I've been astonished. I'm looking at some of these ideas the girl guides must get out there in their uniforms and go bang to make the damn thing go off. But this one will do well at 4. You don't have to abide by that 4.5 pound rule anymore. But that's what you want in a trigger you can manage. Now, fortunately, the triggers in revolvers are usually a good deal better. The single action release of a double action revolver is usually pretty good. Not always, but you don't have to worry as much about it as you do with the auto. The double action pull on a revolver, though, is a little tricky, because a journeyman gunsmith who doesn't really know what he's doing can make that double action pull on your revolver just as light as you want it. What happens is you don't get enough stroke to fire the round. And a lot of these special PPC pistols that you see the police using in revolver matches are just like that. Whether the shot goes off or not is just a question of how it feels in that day. So be careful of that. You want a trigger that you can manage. Without a manageable trigger, you're in trouble, because I think the single most important mechanical adjunct to a good firearm is a good trigger. I would rather, for instance, with a rifle, have a rifle with an excellent trigger and a capacity of 4 minutes of angle than I would have a rifle that had a capacity of 1 minute of the angle but had a bad trigger. Because the grouping I can take care of as long as I can make it break clean. What do we mean by sights that you can see then? Well, speaking of this gun, or that one on the wall over there, which is the original 1911, the sight picture there looks something like this. That's a little notch in the back and a sort of bump out on front. Well, the reason that John Browning designed those sights that way was because he didn't think you're ever going to use the sights. In John Browning's opinion, he said you're going to stick it in somebody's ear and pull the trigger. What do you want sights for? Well, that's what we went to war with. Very unsatisfactory. Neither very precise nor very fast. So, in the war, we got ourselves a square front sight. But it still had a U-shaped rear like that. Now, this sight, if you have time, gives you a pretty good index of elevation, but up and down, very poor index of right and left. So we came out, and after the war, we got ourselves a pistol like this with the square front sight, the small square front sight, and a small square rear notch. And that's where the matter rests at this time. If you buy a 45 service Colt or a replica of it from Springfield, that's what you're going to get. Now, that's accurate. If you have lots of time for slow fire shooting, you can shoot very well with those sights. Some of the records have been established with those. But it's not good enough for the flash sight picture because it takes too long to see. What you want is this. This being a 1/10 or an 1/8, and being with a good deal of light on each side so you can pick it up quickly, instead of as some target sights are cutting this very thin. You don't want to do that. You want there to be enough light here so you get a good index of side to side. Now that's what you want, and that's what we call high visibility sights. Adjustable? They can be adjustable or not. Personally, I do not fancy adjustable sights. Contradiction, I'm wearing adjustable sights, sure, but I shoot a lot. I hang around here and I mess around, and over the years of competition, when I use most of these guns, we change ammunition, and sometimes you need to change your zero. Less often than I think now, but we used to mess around with the sights, and trying to adjust fixed sights can spoil your whole day. You know, you get in there and you wham it here, and it goes too far over there, and you wham it back, and it doesn't. What we should have and don't as a standard accessory, we've got all kinds of accessories except the ones we need. But the one we need is a sort of a U-shaped arrangement that fits over the slide like that and has a key on this side with a worm so that we can go half a turn and move that rear sight back and forth to adjust it for deflection. If you have an elevation problem, it usually doesn't amount to much unless you have an adjustable sight in which the elevation adjustment has broken. Then you find that the rear sight, instead of being like this, is like that. And suddenly you find that you're shooting into the head of the target at 10 yards. Well, you can find that by just looking at the sights, because one thing about a weapon that's as coarse as this one is if your sights are out of adjustment, you don't have to play with them, you can look at them. If your sights are far enough off so you're off in deflection, you look at your slide and your rear sight is way over there, sticking out to one side. It's that coarse. So sometimes we get people here at the school who say, well, I think it's my sights that's doing that. We say, well, you know, it could be. We heard of a situation once back in about 1933 in which the guy's sights actually were off. But let's go try it, and we try it. Generally speaking, it's not your sights, it's something else. But that's a high visibility sight. Now, the question comes up, do you illuminate it? Do you pretty it up with colors and things? Well, that's up to you. I don't think it makes a lot of difference. But if you're going to do anything with that front sight, I strongly suggest that you don't do it in white, because white is designed to be lost against a white shirt, not this one, or a sky, or snow. And all those things occur. So I would strongly suggest that you paint your sight some color which is not found ordinarily in nature. Don't paint it yellow or gold. Yellow or gold is lost immediately against dry grass, a khaki shirt, or, interestingly enough, a lion. So don't paint your front sight gold or yellow. When I was a boy, great fad was for gold bead front sights. I took a gold front sight to Africa once, and I found out that was the wrong thing. Worked fine on buffalo, because buffalo are black, but it's a mess on lion. So if you're going to color that front sight, color it red or flame orange or something. Some people claim they pick it up faster. You can have an insert put in, or you can paint it with nail polish. Either will do. Of course, nail polish wears off. Or a model airplane paint. Both of them wear off. But you can put them back on again every time you clean the gun. No big deal, huh? Now, how about illuminating the rear sight? Well, remember, you're not supposed to look that closely at the rear sight. So gadgets here designed to ease your pain in looking at the rear sight and so on are all right if they don't bother you. I took a fancy at one time to this 3-dot system, and we have put it on the Bren 10, and it was used on some of the H&K weapons. It's not bad. It gives you the black edges to give you a sharp sign if you take time, and it gives you 3 dots on a horizontal line to check your elevation. I don't think I have anything against it, but I've taken it out and used it on comparable pistols on the range here, and it doesn't do anything for me. I mean, I shoot as well one way as another. Perhaps that's not a good indication because I'm an old dog and I've learned one way and maybe it works for other people. I will say if you wish to illuminate your sights, go ahead. But don't expect that they're going to make the difference between victory and defeat. Black on black works pretty well, and it satisfies most of us. One thing I should mention, which is an exception, and that is I've seen some sights makers around, and I think there are a couple in this class that put a white cross on the front sight like that. Now that's a nifty idea if you're going to the Caribbean. You know, in the Caribbean you got zombies and werewolves and things like that. This is made to order for that. But to make it work perfectly, you should be sure that you carry a supply of silver bullets. If you got a white cross and silver bullets, you got it made. Now, there are a couple of other little points here on your sights. Too many rear sights come out that. Sharp edges delight the machinist. Every time he can get a nice razor-sharp corner, he thinks that makes him a better mechanic. And perhaps it does, but that's not what you want. You want the corners rounded, and you want everything on the rear of the weapon rounded. Now, we'll get to that in just a moment when we talk about dehorning, but let's talk for a second about front sights, because if the action is going this way, you want a front sight that looks approximately like this. Now, this will give you all the definition you want, and you don't want something that's designed to make shade. You can get sights come on the Gold Cup that look like that. And all that does is cut your pants and rip your hand. And when you draw it out of a holster that you may not have just rightly attuned, you get a big blob of fuzz out there instead of a front sight. So avoid that sharp corner. You can break it like that on a Gold Cup and get away with it, but this is a better design. Some of the target pistols actually look like this. You can use those for bringing fish aboard if you're out at sea. But what they do here, you put one of those in this type of a rig, this yaki slide, and then you can't get it out. You've got to cut the leather. So you don't want sharp corners. You want something you can see. So we said you want a trigger that you can manage and sights that you can see. The next job, you want dehorning. Now, that varies from weapon to weapon, and it goes for both revolvers and autos, but you want a weapon that won't cut you when you do that. It's odd, but these are hand tools. Wouldn't you think that the manufacturers of hand tools would know? Now, these sharp corners back in here do nothing but draw blood. And when you use the weapon vigorously, you find up you're bleeding all over the place. But of course, the people who make guns don't use the weapon vigorously, so they don't bleed. And we have to take care of that. So all these corners are destructive. You have not only the tang here and the hammer itself, but you have the edge of the safety plate right there. Sometimes has a razor edge. Sometimes the rear edges of the safety itself are very sharp and prismatic. Must be burned off so that the rear feeling of that safety is round to your hand, not sharp. Those things are necessary. Now, from that point on, you have a lot of free choices, things that apply to you but not to somebody else. For my part, I need this grip safety blocked. Now, slightly more than half the people who shoot don't need to do that. So it comes out about 6-4. About 6 people can get by with the grip safety as it comes out of the box. The other 4 have to have it blocked. Some of you have already found that out and are taping it shut. Now, for practice, we just tape it. In the shop there, we can sell you a little metal clip, which will hold it in. A little trimmer to do it like this to pin it shut. It doesn't affect the safety of the weapon in the sense of its being a danger to its user. That device was put in there by John Browning because of a military commitment, a military requirement that the pistol should be carried with nothing on and yet be able to be perfectly safe and yet be able to be fired without doing anything to it. So he put in a grip safety. When you grab the gun, it makes it fireable. When you take your hand off, it's not. That was not because he thought it was a good idea. That was because the Army demanded it. But you see, in those days, nobody believed in the thumb safety. Here. They didn't think that was going to matter. So they didn't even put one on the original Browning. The grip safety was the whole thing. If you are going to use the thumb safety, the grip safety has very little effect on the action. And don't feel that if you take it out, it's going to make the weapon somehow horrible. You see, you're getting these things like home and mother. And if you tell somebody that you deactivated a safety, he goes right through the roof. Because more people who were involved with firearms are concerned with accidental discharges than they are concerned with winning the war. And they don't realize the points that I made yesterday, that safety does not come from gadgets. Safety comes between the ears. If you learn how to use your weapon properly, you don't need any gadgets. And furthermore, gadgets won't help if you don't know how to use your weapon.